Welcome to In This Mad World with Andrew Marshall and Chelsey G, looking at the world beyond the headlines. This is part 2 of this episode of In This Mad World. I have some polling data here. So, first of all, to establish a few things. Population of Israel, 9.9 million people. About 7.4 million are Jewish Israelis. The remainder, about 2 million, are Arabs, Palestinians.
Yeah.
So, there was a poll taken. Let me see here. Okay. So, the Israel Democracy Institute is this, kind of what it sounds like, but they do a lot of polling data in Israel. They're probably like the number one polling data place in Israel. They studied, because Israel had about 5 elections between 2019 and 2022. A great sign of political stability, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can cover that in another...
Yeah, that's another one.
Yeah. But they had about 5 elections. And so they judged the polling just between the 2019 election and then the late 2022 election. And they assessed where people fall on the political spectrum. So in 2019, approximately 46% of Israeli Jews identified as right-wing. 46%. By 2022, that had increased to 62%, which is 16% increase. Then you had the center, which went from 33% in 2019 to 24% in 2022. And then the left, which went from 17% in 2019 to 11% in 2022.
Yes.
So you have, and this is like, if they did this today, these numbers would be even more extreme, because Israel, like anytime during war, Israelis go so far to the right. So the right wing just gets more and more numbers. So if you did these polls today, you'd probably see it even more exacerbated. Today, like for the past 10 years, to be called a leftist in Israel is an insult. So you were talking about kids and education. I remember 10 years ago, 2014. 2014 was a pivotal year for this change to take place in Israel, where because we see the rise of fascism and extreme right-wing movements all over the Western world, Germany, Canada, US, Britain, look what's happening in the UK with these riots right now. The right wing is resurgent. It's rising everywhere. Israel has been ahead of the game for over a decade. They've been moving so far to the right for so long. 2014 was a pivotal year for them, for the emergence and the rise of this right wing. But I remember reading in Haaretz, which is the main, not the most widely read Israeli newspaper, but the most respected Israeli newspaper. And they had an article on the education system, which was actually summarizing a sociological study of Israel's elementary education system that was undertaken by some sociologists, anthropologists, done over a number of years. They went to different so-called normal schools, the version of middle America. It would be middle Israel, kind of normal little town, normal little school. And they went and just interviewed the kids. And so these would all be children to teenagers, essentially.
Yeah.
The findings that came out of this study, Israeli Jews are so indoctrinated with racism. So in class, they would have open discussions about how all the Arabs need to die. They're all terrible. And there was an incident where one girl in the class said, well, maybe not all of them should die. And then she was getting teased at recess by the other students, and the teacher had to intervene because they're calling her a leftist and an Arab lover. And this is 10 years ago. And so
this is insane.
Today, these people are in the IDF. That was just 10 years ago, reading these reports on the education. I'll send you that article. It is shocking. And, that was also a time where you had roving gangs of Israeli Jewish teenagers going around the streets chanting death to Arabs, attacking Palestinians in the streets. These gangs and the people who led these gangs are now ministers in the government. So they're It's not to say that all Israelis are these right-wing lunatics. These extremists are still a minority. Even the settlers are a minority. Settlers are like 700,000, 750,000 people out of 7.4 million. And then you have, even among the 750,000 settlers, most of them are not ideological. I think it's like a 30-70 split. So the ideological settlers are the ones who are like, we are here because God has chosen us to reach prophecy and repopulate the land and settle the land and expel the infidels and Arabs, etc. Most of the settlers are not there for that. Most of them are there for the subsidized housing and cheaper living. Like Tel Aviv is very expensive. You go to a settlement and live a lot cheaper, and then they can just turn a blind eye to all the people who go and like beat up children and elderly Palestinians on their farmland. So the extremists are still a minority, but you never need them to be the majority. You just need the majority to allow the extremists to take over. Yeah. And, Netanyahu and his party, the Likud, like, they're pretty extremist as well. But when you, like, it says something when Netanyahu is, like, the representation of the center for what exists in Israel now. When you look at the Knesset, which is their parliament, which has a total of 120 seats, there are about 4 seats out of 120 that belong to a self-described leftist party, which I wouldn't really describe as very leftist, but nevertheless, 4 out of 120. Like the left, there used to be, like during the 1982 Lebanon War, when Israel invaded Lebanon and then occupied southern Lebanon for the next 18 years. Another thing that people love to forget about.
They're so wild.
Yeah. When Israel invaded Lebanon and committed mass atrocities there and supported other mass atrocities there, that sparked a massive peace movement in Israel called Peace Now. There were protests of hundreds of thousands of people on the streets. Like hundreds of thousands of people on the streets of a country of, at the time, what was it, like 5 million, 6 million people?
Yeah,
like that's a significant...
Where are they today?
Silent, gone, converted, left, right wings. The thing is that there's been such a movement to the right since the Lebanon War, like over the past 40 years, but especially over the past 25 years, especially since 2000 on, since the start of the Second Intifada and then all the Gaza wars. So the youth today have grown up only in an Israel of the far, far right.
Yeah.
And the youth are more religious. They're more extreme right. When you do find...
How do you break that? That's the question I know everyone's thinking about right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's the prepackaged answers, it's like education and opportunity and these kinds of things. And that is true, but the thing is that how do you combat that when the people running the education system are the ones who are creating this problem? So you're not going to find answers from the institutions and the people who are actively creating these problems and exacerbating them. So indeed, those are the answers. Like, how do you combat racism? Well, it's like education is the pretty obvious starting point for that. But their education system is not built for that. No. It would need a total revamp, and you're not going to have anybody in this government. Like, they're all for a revamp, but being like more extreme, more hate, more racism, more religion. And I mean,
it's kind of scary because that seems to be happening all over.
All over.
Well, it's like you see that in the U.S. Like, look at America. Like, it's like the way that Trump runs his campaigns is by like speaking to the Christian followings and the religious followings and pulling on that.
Yes, who he told vote once because you won't have to vote again.
Right? And then, like, look at our own, like, conservative party leader. He's questionable.
Which is a very euphemistic way of saying dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah, he's super dangerous. Like, the guy is fucking weird. He thinks settlements are normal.
Yeah.
There's question, and I'm, like, worried. It's worrisome.
It is. It is. I've even heard from an immigrant here in Canada that he supports Poilievre who is our opposition conservative leader, who is from this like far right, like conspiracy theory universe. He supported like the convoy protests, and I don't really think he believes in anything. I think he's just an opportunist and knows how to manipulate people and jump on a bandwagon and use it to his advantage. Pardon me?
Like a Trump.
Yeah, except like Trump is also just kind of like, Trump is a true believer in the sense that he's a true believer in himself.
Yeah, he's like, I am America.
Yeah, he's like, I am God. I just don't understand why everybody else doesn't realize it.
Like, I read it on the a toilet paper once.
Yeah, like I feel like if he actually got shot and was like dying, not just his earlobe getting shot, but like him, and he was dying, he would be so surprised that he was mortal. Like, it would be like when Caligula died, or was killed in ancient Rome, because he thought he was a god. And then he was assassinated, and he was like, but how? And it's like, you die now, because you're just a crazy man. So I think, like, so yeah, I heard from this one immigrant who was talking about how, because he hates Trudeau, which, like, I'm not, I don't have much good to say about Trudeau, but the thing is that like, I don't think Polyev is the answer to the problem of Trudeau. I'm like, so all the things I dislike about Trudeau are just amped up in the form of Polyev. And then somehow this person was also blaming the housing crisis in Canada on immigrants. And I was like, are you not an immigrant? And then I was like, and also, you think supporting the racist is gonna resolve this? I'm just confused. But anyways, veering too far off. Yeah, so the Israeli education, like, I'll review, because I've been like reading, writing, researching for the past few months, and I have like a whole section of research that I compiled on the Israeli education system. I will get that together. I will send you, it'll be very rough, but I'll send it to you. We can do like a read through individually and then meet up for a podcast and like, let's talk about the education system, because it is a mess and it is scary. But like, it gets into like how the Holocaust is taught in Israel, because it is taught very differently from how you would learn it from, for example, Holocaust scholars in Germany or America or Canada or Europe. It is, you would think that in the country where a quarter of its founding population were Holocaust survivors, you would think that that country would have a well-built education system on the Holocaust itself. You'd think that they would have probably the most sophisticated education on the Holocaust in the world. You would be dead wrong. When I like got into this research, like, it was jaw-droppingly shocking how misused and just sort of off the whole history, the whole way that they study, the whole way that they approach it, and all the lessons that they draw. And one thing they do is also send kids on yearly field trips to Poland, where they go on like this 6-day round trip of, I think it's like 6 or 7 different concentration camps that they go on tours of. And like, it's crammed in there. The tour is so extreme, and they're put through like crazy emotional trauma tour stuff, which is really bizarre and weird. Like, imagine what it's like to be on this train car, and they play like audio of, the train moving and people screaming, and they just like, it's this whole very emotionally manipulative experience. And then they go to Auschwitz, the most notorious of the concentration camps, and the students are encouraged to cry at specific points, which is very weird. And then they're also all encouraged to wear and wave Israeli flags all over the place. And like, you see footage of, teenagers walking around Auschwitz draped in Israeli flags. And it's just like this, such a bizarre image. And it's because the way that they're all taught the Holocaust is like, the lesson from the Holocaust is that we need Israel, and that Israel needs to be strong so that a Holocaust never happens again. Like, that is the lesson. Whereas actual historians of the Holocaust, and this is a growing...
It's interesting. Yeah, because I like, just quickly while you were speaking, I like just Googled like, how does Israel teach about the Holocaust? And like, it comes up that they teach the history of Jewish and world.
Of
Jewish and world.
Jewish and world.
But I'm like, I'm Jewish. Like I was like in school, that's a religion. So it's like, you're not teaching, like that'd be like if we went to school in Canada and they were like, we teach about Catholic and world.
And world. I don't understand the phrasing.
Like they teach about like history. So it was talking about like the history. So it's like history, and then in brackets it's like Jewish in the world. Like in the sense of just saying like, instead of saying like history about like Israel and the world or like where they are, they're once again referencing to like Jewish as like that is their entity. Like
right.
I always find that odd.
Well, that's how, I mean, part of how they teach the Holocaust is that it's seen as just an extension of this historical anti-Semitism, which targets them exclusively, and that Nazi Germany was just the most virulent, horrible form of this, and that it led to the creation of Israel to prevent that from ever happening again. That's kind of like a version that some scholars might back up like until the 1960s, when real scholarship started on the subject. But if you look at, I would wager a bet to say most Holocaust scholars today and most historians of Nazi Germany, to draw out the lessons, you're talking more about what happens with a state that seeks colonialism, nation building, empire building, settlement, that promotes racism, a ethno-nationalist state that excludes the quote-unquote other, that identifies people as subhuman, that's a powerful militaristic state. Like, these are the lessons that I draw, like, from my own study of history and following historians who know what they're talking about. And when you draw those lessons, it doesn't really look kindly on Israel, because you start to hear the same descriptions. Like, those words, those everything that I just said can apply to Israel, right? Yeah. And like that should really be the lesson. And like when you look at sort of that history and how it happened, like the West was kind of like, oh, sorry about the Holocaust, here, have this country, but to keep it and to maintain it and to build it, you have to do what we did, which isn't really an apology so much as forcing Jews to become like their oppressors. Yeah, so, you know, you have the, like, we basically said sorry by giving Jews a state and then saying, do like we did and follow our example, which was terrible examples to follow. And you know, that's kind of what happened. But for that to happen, for that to exist and for that to persist and for that to be legitimized, you can't actually teach a proper understanding of the Holocaust. Because then you'll draw wider lessons that aren't just the narrow focus on what happened.
Right? More questions come up and you start to dig deeper.
Yeah, because the Holocaust, Nazi Germany didn't happen in a vacuum. It wasn't this one little thing. You had all these countries, this whole region, a whole system, this whole like system of states and empires, and that's what happened. And it wasn't like when Israelis teach history of Israel, when you look at the education system, it starts 3,000 years ago and then jumps 2,000 years. So they literally skip over.
They literally skip out.
They skip Christianity. Jesus doesn't appear in the history of Israel, of the land of Israel, because he's just some person. You know, like they skip the history of the land to focus on the history of the Jews that they approve of in that land. Mm-hmm. And for a very specific reading of Jewish history in that land.
And I think that's what I was trying to say when I was reading that. I'm like, it's super obvious to me that it's like that's what they teach. Like it's like about what works in their mold.
Yes.
Of what's right.
Myopic, narrow, very.
Which is like if you were to think about like even like our own systems like in education, like I don't feel that we're really like adequately taught about like
anything
and like it's like even like I remember like being like, okay, yeah, like we learned like a little bit about Canadian history, but like I feel like we focused a lot more on like American history and like the Holocaust. Like we didn't really focus on like what we did.
Correct.
We skipped over that.
Yeah, that was, and if it was referenced, it was like a little paragraph.
It's so funny you talk to like an American and they're like, there's history outside of us.
Yeah.
They're like, we only learned about the slaughterings of our own inside our own country, and we're like fucking proud.
Yeah.
It's like they're like, woo, Civil War.
Well, if you want a little tidbit on the Americans, look at what they name a lot of their weapons of war, like Black Hawk helicopters. Black Hawk was one of the tribes that they wiped out. So they name, yeah. And literally, like, that's not the only one. It's the one that I can think of at the moment.
I know. It's like
Apache.
It's like
Apache helicopter, another tribe that they wiped out. They name the weapons and machinery of war that the Americans build and export to go kill people all over the world. They named after tribes that they exterminated. Like, that's kind of like, that's pretty fucked up.
They're wild down there.
Yeah, that's, I do appreciate
you guys stay down there. Don't come up. Just like build the hedges.
I do appreciate when they had their more honest moments, like during, or rather prior to the end of World War II. The Pentagon didn't exist, but the Department of Defense was just called the Department of War. And I was like, that makes more sense.
Yeah, at least you're honest.
Yeah. And then after that, they're like, no. We have to pretend we're the Department of Defense. And, you know,
Department of War. So much more honest.
Yeah, it really was.
And then you can, like, respect it.
You at least can respect that. It's like respecting, or not respecting. It's...
Yeah, what's the term we're looking for here? Because it's like, I don't respect Russia, but, like, there's got to be something to be said about the fact that he's just like, this is what's up.
You can appreciate the directness, the honesty.
Like he's like, yes, I am invading, and I'm doing all these things you don't want me to do at all, and I'm going to continue to do it. And where you have, like, Bibi over here being like, no civilian casualties have been had.
Yeah.
And you're like, I'm pretty sure I just watched, like, numerous videos of child civilian deaths. Like, so I don't know what you're talking about. Like, it's like that peril of they're delusional. They're both delusional, but, like, on different scales.
Yeah. Well, it's like having a conversation with, like, a right-wing Southern racist, where it's like, you're just like, I know exactly what you are. Like, nothing you say surprises me.
You can change me.
Like, I know what you're doing. Versus having a conversation with, like, a northern, urban, city liberal who is also racist, but whose racism is couched under all this language, and who are like, oh, I support Black Lives.
Racist, you mean?
Yeah.
Like the sneaky ones.
The liberals.
The
liberals. And that's most liberals. I'm not saying that that's a small, I'm saying most liberals. You know, like the ones who are like, oh, I support Black Lives Matter, but not when they, you know, like, interrupt my commute to work kind of thing. Yeah. You know, like that kind of thing. Like, I'm against racism.
All lives matter.
Yeah, I'm against racism, but if it affects my daily commute, then, you know, maybe Black lives don't matter that much. That's liberal racism. Whereas at least the conservative right winger is just like, I don't like Black people. You're like, well, at least I know where you stand. Whereas, like,
you're like, I'm actually going to be at that protest. I'm going to be running you over.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, you're like, oh, okay. At least I, like, see you coming. Yeah. Like, waving.
See you there. Yeah.
But, like, this buddy over here is the one that calling the cops on me. Like.
Yeah, while posting, like, a black square on social media.
Oh, God. There are too many of those people.
Don't we all?
I know.
But, yes. So, there are... But in Israel, like, open, blatant racism is the standard. Like, it is now... The transformation that has taken place just over the last 10 years is quite profound. And to see and hear what is said... Like, again... I think it was 2013.
Like, let's just, like, talk about that fucking video that's, like, circulating right now. Like, about that mom and that baby. They were, like, locked in a house, burned alive. Have you seen that?
No. Which is this?
This is, like, circulating all through social media.
Say more words.
It's, like, from an Israeli social media account, like an IDF soldier. And it's, like, of a house burning. And it's, like, of a mom and a child. And you can hear the cries.
This is in Gaza?
Yeah.
Ah.
And it's, like... Maybe we should, like, look into that before we, like, fully release this aspect of it. Because, I'm like, wait a minute. Maybe I'm, like, sharing something that's not legit. But I'm positive that it is. But we'll, like, come back around.
Okay.
But that would be, like, just, like, the way that they, like, are sharing the humiliation online is, like, such blatant racism. Like, it's just, like, there's no even, like, hiding it. Like, it's, like, that's, like, your, like, that's your, like, army that's, like, showing that they literally are killing people purely based off racism. That's scary.
Yeah. Well, and you look at the recent riots, protests at Sde Teiman, the military prison.
Yes, about the rapes.
Yeah.
That was crazy. So crazy.
For our audience, you have an incident. So Sde Teiman is the name of this Israeli military prison that they built, where they've been funneling Palestinian prisoners
actually
through.
Takes us back to our very first portion of our question, which was what I was talking about earlier, which was circulating videos of the Palestinian or the IDF soldiers behind the shields.
That's right.
Palestinian soldiers. Same prison.
That's right.
For people watching.
Yes. And so there was an incident where the Israeli military sought to enforce the law for once. An incident. It was a momentary.
Do something about it.
A momentary lapse of judgment.
Talk about if rape's legit.
Yeah. No, it was a momentary lapse of judgment.
In a democratic country, let's chat about this.
Exactly.
Is it?
And they did. They did.
Can we rape?
But so what the case was that this is a military prison where they hold Palestinian prisoners from Gaza, and it's a torture camp.
So brutal. It's the one that a couple months ago, imagery came out of them standing in cages, being handcuffed, zip tied, not even handcuffed, and left to either be sitting with bags on their heads or standing for hours in very small cages in masses of hundreds. Also
shackled to beds, wearing diapers, and many of them have had to have feet, limbs, hands amputated because the shackles have just caused so much damage that was the only solution.
I believe that Gaza has the largest population of amputees in the world now.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially child amputees. But so there's been ample documentation, CNN investigations, New York Times investigations, human rights investigations. Israel's own B'Tselem, which is a very good human rights group, just released a report, I think today, called From Hell, which is all about the prison system and...
Those Christ, just the name alone.
Yeah, and literally calls Sde Teiman and other camps... torture camps is the term they use. So these are brutal facilities, and there was one incident where and many people, including in the New York Times report, came out reports of sexual torture and rape, and not just this is rape with hot metal objects is what was described.
Fire extinguishers.
That was one, yeah. And so there was an incident where one Palestinian was raped with various objects, had to go to the hospital, and he just died today, actually, or yesterday.
That's so sad.
But in response, the Israeli military undertook an internal investigation, partly because, again, coming around to our starting place, of the pressure of international law and the ICJ rulings and all this pressure. It's not enforced, but it has political pressure repercussions.
Yeah.
And so you may be seeing certain elements of the Israeli state trying to at least appear as if they adhere to some version of international law. And so the military's sort of internal investigator sent military police to go arrest 9 IDF soldiers who were running who are essentially prison guards at this torture camp. And when they showed up to arrest them, the IDF were kind of confronting them, and then they were posting this on social media, and then right-wingers in the parliament and the cabinet, including Itamar Ben-Gvir, the national security minister and Jewish Power Party chairman, were basically sending out calls on social media to show up there and protest. So you had you had members of the Knesset, so that's parliamentarians. You had cabinet ministers showing up to this prison, along with hundreds of right-wing protesters, settlers, many of them themselves IDF soldiers in uniform, armed, who stormed the gates, stormed into the prison. Eventually, the soldiers were arrested, and then they were taken to another military prison for questioning. And then there was another protest of right-wingers there. Simultaneously, over at the Knesset, the same day in Jerusalem, you had a discussion inside the Knesset of whether or not it's okay to rape somebody. And they determined...
So insane. Not somebody, a Palestinian.
A Palestinian. And the response was...
I think what word it was, yeah.
Yeah, the response was yes if... Well, he said if it's the Nukba, like, which is the term for, like, a certain fighting force of the Hamas, then he said yes, of course. And to them, it's like anybody who's Palestinian and arrested is therefore guilty and therefore Hamas, even though it's like a chef. You know, it doesn't matter who they are. They're Palestinian, therefore guilty.
Which just there goes to show, like, you're not democratic.
Correct. Yeah. But so you had this whole prison torture scandal erupt. And, like, this is the reaction, like, to have an example of, like, where Israel is today as a state, as a society, that pretty much encapsulates the present standing. And it's not that, you know, you're not going to see 80+% support for, you know, these rioters going to go support IDF soldiers' right to rape and kill Palestinians, but this is the level of where their society is. That you have ministers, that you have parliamentarians who are there, who say these things, support these things, who are backing these people up. And it sends a symbol, it sends a message, rather, down the chain of command that you can do whatever you want to these people, whatever you want to the Palestinians.
Literally.
And you will be backed up.
That I agree. Like, they're, like, sending a message that way.
That's what it is. And these people, like the right wing, like the left wing that doesn't exist in Israel, there is no messaging. You know, the right wing, they know, they have their messaging, and they know how to, you know, send the flag up the pole and have that message heard by the people that are listening. And that's an increasingly large number of Israelis. And while Israeli society itself may be very divided and in many ways could even end up in a civil war type scenario, when it comes to, you know, there's so many divisions between, like, the different kind of groups, like the Ashkenazi and the Mizrahi and the religious and the secular. And there's all these different divisions, like where you live and the city or the small towns, blah, blah, blah. When it comes to killing Palestinians, overwhelming unity. Overwhelming.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about this last time too. Like, and that shocked me. Like, that was like, and then I actually went and did a little research, and it was shocking. Like, at the amount of people that agree. And then that would lead me to my next question for you, which would then be like what leads us into our next podcast. But what I want us to all, like, think and stew on is, what do you think is going to happen?
In Israel?
Yeah, because, like, I think to myself, okay, yeah. And it's like, I know you can't even answer that question because it's like, we don't really know. But I think that I love when I ask you those types of questions. Like, so for the people who are watching, when, like, I start to see things, like, heating up in a certain place, I love to, like, connect with Andrew and start to pick his brain on, like, what he's been seeing. Because he's usually, like, 10 pulses ahead of me and can, like, kind of predict ways things might play out. So I like to think, like, I would love to think, what do you think is the worst case scenario and what is the best case scenario? Because from what I've studied and from where I'm at, like, in my learning curve, which is definitely not at your level, but I would say maybe a little bit, like, more skewed than some of the viewers, like, just where I've been, like, doing it for a little bit longer, is that at this rate, the way that they have, like, been hammering Gaza, there's nothing, it would take, like, decades to rebuild what they've destroyed.
80 years is what the UN said.
It's like, they have totally decimated that place. And the thing is that I love the people because they would probably remain in the rubble and stay till the end to, like, keep their land. But it's like, it's just not inhabitable right now. Like, it's not like, I don't, like what is there, like, what happens here? Like, this is like, you've basically taken a place and destroyed it. Like, there's nowhere for them to go.
No.
And now it feels very much like you're watching them, the news, which anyone who's been paying attention would know, they were going to eventually head into the West Bank and start doing what they're doing there. And it's, like, just difficult to watch. Like, it's difficult because we now know, like, that's what we know what's going to, like, we've already watched it play out. This is not going to not play out here.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, what's going to happen? Like, it's difficult.
I mean, are you asking what's going to happen with Gaza?
I think I'm asking what's going to happen as a whole. Like, it's like,
wow,
there's got to be a breaking point. And it's going to be whether it's, like, because they're right now Israel's saying like no two-state resolution, not going to happen.
Oh no, they even made a parliamentary resolution against that a
so
couple
in my
weeks
mind
ago.
that means it's like death toll, like someone's got to win.
Yeah. So worst case, best case, you said?
Yes.
Okay. Best case, I'll have to come to that one after. Best case is hard.
Because I feel like there is no best case right now.
There isn't. I don't, like, for me, to identify what the best case scenario is would basically be if everything stopped right now.
Me too. That's what I say. It's like, just like end it. Fucking walk away.
And it's not going to happen.
No.
I don't think any best case scenario I can come up with just doesn't seem realistic by any measure.
Mm-hmm. Which makes me think it's like only worst case scenario.
There are a tier of
It's just so
worst
sad, you know what I mean?
case
Where
scenarios.
It's like, okay, they get pushed out to the fucking desert.
I would say
They're alive.
the best case scenario might actually be like, and I don't think this is remotely likely, conceivable, whatever, a U.S. invasion and occupation of Israel.
Yeah, that's what I've been thinking. I was like, get in there already.
A so-called humanitarian intervention. I mean, the U.S. has promoted and sold wars.
Maybe Kamala will do it.
She won't.
Letting us down already. No shot. No shot.
Don't raise any expectations.
She's like, let's start imprisoning some more people.
Yeah. No, I mean, really, like, I'm very glad Biden's not going to be running, but, like, the benchmark for the next candidate is, do you have a pulse?
Like, we could do
that's
a whole series on fucking Kamala.
Yeah. But we'll cross that bridge. But,
Yeah.
So, okay, that's the best case scenario, which I consider to be basically just kind of like a fantasy land, Narnia.
Yeah, I love to think about that sometimes. Like, I just, like, lay in bed thinking I'm gonna, like, wake up. And
I mean, the best case scenario would be if the United States said to Israel, no more weapons, no more cover
no more aid
at the UN, no more aid.
Yeah.
And not only that, but we're imposing sanctions to change behavior. I think that's best case scenario. That's the only best case that I could consider.
Less deaths.
Yeah, but I would consider that in the realm of possibility. I don't think it's likely by any means, but it's theoretically possible. Like any U.S. president could say this.
Could do that. Yeah.
Now, what the question?
Will they?
No, but that's best case.
I don't know. Did you see that one candidate that was going off? I'll send it to you later.
Okay.
Candace Bush, I think is her name. Anyway, she
Cori
was
Bush?
threatening, like, pardon?
Cori Bush?
Is that it?
Like, she was the one who was talking about AIPAC?
Yes.
Okay, Congresswoman, not presidential candidate.
No, I know. Didn't she lose, like, she lost, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I just meant in the sense that you see the people starting to pick up on, like, what's happening within the U.S.
Yes.
Like, more people are getting vocal. That maybe she's not a presidential person, but she still has influence.
Yes, to a degree.
Yeah. On people.
Yes. And, like, that would be great if we had more of that. That's a best case scenario, but that takes years. And Gaza doesn't have years. The West Bank doesn't have years. Palestine doesn't have years.
Days.
So then when we get to what I think are more likely scenarios, I see basically an overlapping of 3 different scenarios kind of taking place. And this, I would say, over the coming months and years. And there can be, like, movements back and forth on this, but these are the 3 general processes I see at play within Israel. And so then we can kind of imagine what the repercussions would be for the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza as a result. But I see, it's like I'm some sort of soothsayer. It seems like the likely scenarios are full-blown fascism. And I don't think Israel is there yet. I think there are fascists in the government. There is a growing fascist movement. Increasingly, fascists are in power. But it is not yet a fascist system with a fully fascist government that is, like, in charge. You have the fascists in charge of certain ministries. You can make an argument for Netanyahu having certain fascistic impulses and ideas, but Netanyahu's a bit like Trump. His ideology, yeah, he's a right-winger and he believes in a lot of the same shit that people like Itamar Ben-Gvir believe in, but Netanyahu's there for himself, first and foremost. His belief is in ego above all else. So I think full-blown fascism and theocracy with it, so religious rule, I think that's a fairly likely scenario in the coming years for Israel. But with that...
Wait, what was that one?
Full-blown fascism and theocracy. Which is kind of... Yeah, no, that is a nightmare for the Palestinians. Like, if everything we saw in the past 10 months is horrifying... It's nothing compared to.
They need to leave. Like it's like, and then in my mind, I'm like, fucking leave, man. Like it's like you deserve better. Like you deserve. I know it's so horrible to leave. You're like, but it's like I can't imagine seeing that. Like I just want to like come in and rescue you because it's like how could you like it's like oh my god if I was like sitting here knowing like in the next like 10 years my life is gonna be sheer fucking hell. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think.
But they can't leave. That's like the worst part about it. You say that, and then it's like.
And then you're in a prison.
They've closed every fucking border, and then if you want to cross the border, you got dirty Egypt over there making you pay like 10 grand a fucking person, US dollars, to get them through the fucking border.
Yeah.
So it's literally a prison where they're stuck. And it's like, but then, their pride.
In prisons, you have food and lodging.
They don't even have food or water. The fucking skin diseases going around now.
Yeah. So.
They're gonna wipe them out.
So, the fascism theocracy, but this would also create major splits with the military. The military and the far-right lunatics, like Itamar Ben-Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich, etc., the settlers, they often butt heads. They're part of the same colonial project, and they often have to work together on the ground, but politically from the top, they are very much at odds most of the time, and tend to really, like, butt heads politically in the Knesset and in the cabinet, and in the course of the war. So I think that if you had the likes of Itamar Ben-Gvir becoming prime minister, you may see an attempt at a military coup. The problem is that when you get lower down in the military ranks, it's the same problem that we see in the education system, and that we all see coming out on all like the TikToks coming out of Gaza, is that a lot of the rank and file are pretty much on board with these right-wing extremists and are among their ranks, and increasingly the youth. And you have had, even over the past 10 months, increased recruitment by the IDF of settlers, of extremists in the West Bank to police the West Bank in IDF uniform, which is why assaults and murders of Palestinians in the West Bank have been at record highs. You know, everybody's eyes are on Gaza, but the colonization and ethnic cleansing in the West Bank is unprecedented. 19 communities wiped out in the past 10 months.
Yeah, it's crazy.
In the West Bank. So you have that. So I think...
And then you have
when you
Jerusalem.
Yeah. And when you have the lower ranks who is kind of split. So I think there would be quite a split that would emerge in the military. And when you have a militarized state where the military is so central to the culture historically, presently, like Egypt, another, state that they don't have anything like or alike. And when you have that kind of split, the result tends to be civil war. So I think those are the three main processes that I would consider likely to start playing out over the next couple years in Israel. You could have fascism, theocracy, coup, civil war. And the idea that all three could be kind of simultaneously taking place, which interestingly would in fact make Israel much more like its neighbors than it had ever desired. When you're talking about coups and civil wars and sort of absolute tyranny, then it's like, what were you saying again about being unique? You look just like your neighbors, except it's a Jewish supremacist state, which, despite whatever tyrannical neighbors of Israel's might be. Like Iran, for example, kind of a theocracy itself, not fascist, but an authoritarian theocracy. It's not
I was gonna say, like it's like their neighbors are no better. Like, and it's like then in moments I find myself being like,
but Iran also
frustrated.
isn't a supremacist state. It's not.
Yeah, like Iran is like gnarly.
It is, but it's not a supremacist.
It's like, no, but they're still doing some pretty crazy ass fucking shit.
Well, yeah. Like,
just like
you wouldn't want to live there. You wouldn't want to have to answer to that government.
No, after like all and just like even just like the like hangings and killings of protesters from like the Women's March, and after that girl was killed in like police custody. Yeah. It's just like I feel like I watch them like the way that they parade themselves around in media a little bit, like trying to be these like heroes for like the situation that's happening, but I'm like, don't.
PR.
Zoom in on what you're doing.
But that's the thing. It's for a lot of states in the region, when Israel's killing Palestinians, it's a great public relations opportunity for them because they get to make their statements, like, and they get to wag their finger at the Israelis.
Yemen is like, don't get me wrong, I'm like obviously happy to see like Yemen like doing what they're doing and just like rising up and just like being this like country that's just been like fucking boom, 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 boom by the US for fucking years. But also they have also done some like pretty wild shit. It's like there's always something going on, and I find it difficult to sometimes. I feel like these countries get praise, and you're like, wait. It sounds like back up for a minute because they're dirty in another way.
And a lot of that is derived from learning by social media, where it's a lot easier to just have binaries.
Yeah.
Because then you can learn by meme. And it's sort of like Israel bad, Yemen good, or Houthis good, I should say.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, okay, like, if you actually want to learn about it, then you have to like go a little deeper. And it's like when you go a little deeper into the Houthis, it's like, okay, this is a fighting force. They're very good, very effective, fighting 10 years against the Saudis and the Americans and all this. And then
they're terrible leaders.
Exactly. So when it comes to actually ruling, their support plummets because they don't know how to rule. They know how to fight. They don't know how to rule. Yeah. And then this comes up, and suddenly they're fighting again, and they're.
It's like, look at Venezuela.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, it's just like madness down there.
Yeah.
And it's like I look at when people say to me like this, but like I don't pay attention because it's like just like we're over here. This is our country, our life, and I'm like, but the thing is, like, to ever think that this just like I know it's a wild, far-fetched thing, but it's not too far-fetched anymore when you look at the way that government's going in the U.S. and Canada.
To imagine that we go the same direction.
Like to the route of like, where like you look at Israel now and it's like slowly over time it's crept into the government and now they have a problem.
Yeah. And we all have our own version. Yes. We I think it's safe to say that across the West you have this ever rightward drift and the rise of fascist movements. You had the same thing in the 20s and 30s across Europe and elsewhere. There were fascist movements all over Europe. You had Nazi rallies in New York. You had like, these were powerful movements. Didn't come to power everywhere. Like the fascists came to power through elections in 2 countries, Italy and Germany. They did come to power through war in a few other countries. That was mostly the Nazis being like, and now you're in charge, and now you're in charge. Like fascism was a prominent movement in the UK, in France, in America, in Belgium, the Netherlands, Sweden.
I guess it's just kind of scary to like live through it.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? You read about it in history books and you read all these things and you're like, oh my god, it's fucking crazy. That's never gonna happen now. Like, and now you're like seeing it in live time and you're like, how is this happening?
I forget who said it, but there's a famous quote, something like, may you be cursed to live in interesting times.
Yeah.
Which feels very much like our time.
Yeah.
And, it's certainly like a very interesting time to be alive, but it's a very challenging and scary time to kind of be conscious of what's taking place in the world.
Mother, I'm like, what's my son's life going to look like?
No kidding.
And it's like, and that's me thinking, sitting here in Canada as a white female. Like, I can't imagine sitting in fucking Gaza as a mom right now, holding my child, being like, where does my child's future go? There's no future because no one sees them as people. Like, it's like
you can't even focus on that. Where's my water?
Where's my meal? Where's my water? Where's my fucking diaper for my baby? Where's the milk for my infant? Like, so I'm like, it's like a privilege for me to be able to think like, will Forum be able to breathe air in like the next 20 years? I feel like sometimes it's just so crazy to see the way the world is moving.
Yes. And there's also, and this is really more like where my research comes in over the past like 15 years, is looking, because I'm an expert on nothing, but I've just researched a lot of different things over the years, but not one subject, but bringing it into like understanding the global aspect and how this is all related. So like understanding that what happens in Israel and Gaza isn't separate, insignificant, or unrelated to Canada or to America or to Germany or to the UK. Like that this right-wing rise, this fascist rise, this is not something that's just defined or confined rather to one area, to one spot, to one country. And that these are things that we are all facing. And when you include, the overall like economic system, global economic system to which we are all subjected, and when you include climate change, and when you include all these aspects, you really have to take a global look. It helps us, understand that the way out is understanding that global perspective and acting on it and building global movements that can challenge these things over time. But I remember back in 2016, somebody saying to me offhandedly, like, who cares who becomes elected in the States? It has no impact on us up here. And I was like, c'est quoi? Like, we're Canada. Like, it's very relevant who's running America. We're the Austria to their Germany. You know what I mean? Like, if they get a Hitler, bye-bye Canada, because...
Literally.
Like...
We're dead.
It's the Anschluss, where Germany just like, and now Austria is part of us.
Literally, that's what I think about all the fucking time. Like, I'm like, if the U.S. decided, like, Mexico and I, like, we are done, though.
Yeah, it doesn't look good.
No.
And, you would have, like, a lot of refugees coming up, but then they'd be a threat, because refugees are always a threat to such threatening nations.
Yeah.
So we would not be spared. And I think it's really when you look at geography and conflict over the past 100 years in the world, North America, specifically North America, but is an exception in terms of the fact that we haven't had tanks rolling through our streets and airstrikes on urban areas and cleansing operate, like, yeah, that, we had our version of that against indigenous peoples, prior to that. But in the 20th century warfare, we've basically been spared. We're this strange, vast territory that hasn't been subjected to the realities that most of the world has experienced in one way or another. And it makes us a little naive. It makes us very, very privileged and fortunate, but it also makes us a little naive. And it makes us also quite complacent to believe that because we haven't had this experience, we won't. And I think that's a misnomer.
I mean,
And I think that is wrong. And the whole point of learning about fascism or from history or about warfare or about these things is to try to do something when you start to smell it. And see it and feel it and hear it. And like, you have to, the whole point is not to like wait until we're ruled by fascist regimes to be like, oh, I think this is not great. Like, too late. Too late by then. You don't get to say those words at that point. Like, we're still at the point where we have the right to speak on these things. So raising awareness, trying to generate understanding, knowledge, education, etc.
The things we're doing right now.
Yeah, like this is how we are attempting to address these problems, and other people kind of tuning in, wanting to sort of like wake up to some of these issues and figure out like what the fuck? What the fuck is going on in this world? And what can we do about it? And we're all asking these questions.
It's so scary because I was just at a family event. My dad had passed away, so we had like his celebration of life this past weekend. And we were sitting around, me and my family members, and they started talking about our government, and just all of them were like down to go conservative. And in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, like, are you guys thinking this through at all? Like, any of you? Like, I've got a nurse in the family. I've got like my brother who's got 3 fucking daughters. I've got like it's like, are you reading any of their party policies, the things that they want to put in place? We've got people in our family who are like identifying as things that would be technically in the eyes of the conservative parties, things that they wouldn't be agreeing upon. And it's like, you want to be like down with that because it might get you a tax break. I'm like, are we gonna like, I get that like things are tough and expensive right now, but are we looking at the bigger picture? We're like, well, it's just like the way it goes. Every 10 years we go conservative. And I'm like, but no, this is like, we need to be paying attention, learning, like, this is painful to hear.
Yeah. And the conservatives aren't what they used to be.
No. And then and everyone's learning everything based off memes or TikTok or whatever. So if you ask them questions like, okay, well, like, have you looked at actual like policies that they put in place or things that have been brought forward, policies that their party wants to put in place, and this potential prime minister has supported those, like, and they'll be like, well, no, like, that's fake news. And that's actually something someone said. It's like, I can't believe this. These are terms I'm hearing.
Yeah. That's the level of discourse. And
it's so upsetting.
I think it was Plato who said, like, 4,000 years ago, the price or the cost of indifference to public affairs is to be ruled by evil men.
It's insane.
And a few women, I guess, now that it's 2024.
Yeah, like, no, there's a couple women there.
Yeah.
They can be pretty.
A few evil women.
Yeah, got a couple bitches.
Yeah.
Hillary. So.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to end this. This is a 2-parter by the length of it.
Oh yeah, totally. I think we did a good job this time.
I think so. In This Mad World is a podcast from empireandeconomics.com, hosted by Andrew Marshall, that's me, and Chelsey G. Music by Francesco Caruso. Please subscribe, like, and share. Visit empireandeconomics.com. Thank you for listening.